Morning all, let's have a look at round 6 of the World Championship Candidates 2013. So this game, to start off with, let's have a look at Peter Spidler playing white versus Magnus Carlsen. So e4, and Magnus plays e5, and we have now a Roy Lopez, standard Roy Lopez. After castles, bishop e7, we see the move d3, which is often used to keep the tension and to avoid the dreaded Marshall Gambit, which is seen often as a way of comfortably drawing nowadays. So c3, we can have later a Marshall Gambit, but now we have b5, okay, bishop b3, and Magnus plays now d6. Okay, black's setup is solid. White now plays a4, trying to weaken the light squares a little bit. After b4, okay, white has that c4 square to play with. Black's structure on the queen side can also be undermined a little bit with c3 sometimes, but it does give black potentially b-file play. We see knight bd2, now Magnus castles. Another move, a5. So this is interesting. Hemming in the bishop with the a6 pawn. Knight c4 looks quite good. One of the things about black's position, though, is it can be liberated with thematic thrust at the right time with d5. If there's enough protection on e5, sometimes d5 liberates black's position in quite a few ways. It opens up, for example, the bishop. It puts pressure down the d file. It's a key strategic idea for black to play for d5, and a5 probably doesn't help reinforce the center, although it has some other advantages here. Now black's next move, bishop e6, is not just challenging the bishop, but it's also helping potentially support a later d5. Knight c4, and we see rook b8, which seems to want to discourage c3. You know, why expose the bishop to pressure here? But it's, if white doesn't play c3, then black has a really good grip on the position here. Okay, so c3 with the idea potentially of playing even for d4 later at the right time. So Magnus takes on c3, we have takes, and now h6, which prevents any annoying pins. Black's really starting to be set up for this thematic break in the center soon. Rook e1, and now we see queen c8. So rook e1 might be kind of designed against black ever playing d5, because e5 is always usually a problem. Queen c8 is a very interesting move. Potentially the option of bishop g4 or taking on h3 even, if h3, to just take it is very interesting. Okay, so bishop c2, and now we see rook d8, and it's really evident that d5 could be quite interesting for black. At the moment, of course, e5 is still an issue. Queen e2, bishop f8. Now knight e3 takes away pressure from e5, and it's in this position that d5 really is possible. And what does it do? Let's have a look. Magnus plays it now. Why would this move be so powerful? And it's often been the case that Aronian, also playing Roy Lopez as black, has played this d5 and had a really powerful game after, often winning. When black classically occupies the center with e5, sometimes this bishop is a problem. That's one feature. This dark square bishop can become a menace if only it's given a chance. Here, you know, white isn't really able to punish black's d5 with, say, structural damage, like in a previous Magnus Carlsen game playing white, where he was able to double the opponent's pawns in one round, playing white. With d5 not being punishable, it really does liberate the bishop it extends the scope of the rook, it threatens d4. Okay, and if white has to take on d5, you know, we see all of black's pieces really quite energized now after knight takes d5, and immediate threats as well on this pawn. Okay, but what about the e5 issue here? White took here on d5. We'll check in a second pass other alternatives. And now if bishop takes d5, it does seem as though knight takes e5 is possible, so rook takes d5 was played. And you might think, well, isn't it possible to dislodge this rook in some way? And that's definitely something we need to check out. But c4 might be answerable with knight d4. That's one potential issue. Okay, or even rook takes a5. So that's definitely something for the second pass to check out here. Is there no way of white exploiting this pressure on e5? That's one obvious downside of black playing for d5. But there's been so many high-level games when this d5 has kind of equalized for black, and black going on to win. Okay, so white here actually plays h3, preventing any nasty pin potentially, but it does offer the opportunity tactically for black to play bishop takes h3 at the right time sometimes, and that can be really kind of dangerous. We see bishop f5, so this d pawn is picked on. This rook is just energized really, and also it's not just the bishop, it's this queen. The queen is also able to exert pressure along the d and e files potentially. We see rook d1. It seems a very passive, timid setup. It's like, look at white's pieces and pawns. It seems very, very passive. And there's a weak pawn here on a5 as well potentially. But at the moment, you know, e5 keeps black away from winning any material. The knight has to help defend e5, one would assume. So queen e6 is played here, which introduces various possibilities like doubling rooks, potentially putting the queen there, but there's knight h4s. Okay, but potentially also supporting e4, which further would liberate black's position and dissolve the downside of the d5 move. Just really, black's pieces are becoming lively. We see bishop b1, which threatens, it seems, bishop a2 for a skewer. Queen d7 getting out of that and putting more pressure on d3. Okay, so at any time I think c4 needs to be calculated, like here it really needs to be calculated. I assume it's knight d4 would be a strong response, but we'll wait for the second pass. Bishop e3, and now Magnus plays e4, and this looks really annoying on this pin. Look at this congestion of this bishop b1, this loose rook, so it can't take. Peter can't take. He plays knight d4, and now Magnus takes on d4, and we see bishop takes d4, and there's a slight weakness to the last move. The bishop's come off the g5 square, and actually we'll really investigate this in the second pass, but Magnus appears to have a very promising tactical shot based on this kind of weakness in the last move and forcing lines and king safety here. In the game Magnus played e takes d3, but this is definitely a second pass in-depth technical analysis of bishop takes h3 here, which we'll check in detail. So for example, queen takes h3 like here would threaten rook g5, and this starts to get really kind of scary. But for the full implications of this, we'll wait for the second pass. So in the game, Magnus played e takes d3, which does give black a certain advantage anyway. White's structure is a little bit shaky, but black's pieces are all liberated with no liability of the e5 pawn now. So he's really liberated his whole position. Okay, the light square bishops come off, and now we see in this position what seems to be a promising use of this pin c5, but it's countered tactically with bishop e5 attacking the rook. But Magnus does this anyway. Rook takes d3, bishop takes b8, and now marks down his possession of the d file with c4, which also extends the scope of the bishop, giving the bishop potentially c5. Very useful. White's bishop now goes to e5 here, protecting the pawn, and we see now bishop c5, which pins this pawn. So any bishop g3, there's rook takes g3. So it seems this is a very pleasant position for black at the moment. Can white do anything? Rook b1 looks like an active, aggressive move. Queen d5, a powerful centralization. And here, of course, rook d2 always looks pretty dangerous for the f2 pawn as well. We see check, king h7. Now white is faced with this horrible rook d2, and also rook d1 could be quite dangerous as well. It's a difficult position, and in this difficult position we see Peter playing a rather optimistic, should we call it an optimistic move. He plays the move queen h5, and I don't want to spoil what the threat is here. I wonder if you can see what white is threatening in this position after queen h5 if I gave you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, white is actually threatening a cheapo here, rook h8 check, and if takes, queen takes h6 check. Just to demonstrate this cheapo, let's say this was played, check, only move, check using the pin, and mate. So that's the cheapo being threatened with queen h5. Magnus responds to this with queen e4, and this basically provides the queen h7 resource needed. So this isn't doing anything now, rook h8. If rook h8 now, you could simply take and now play queen h7, and white has no attack, and it's run out of pieces. So queen e4 though is a pretty nasty move, introducing various tactical ideas. White's pieces are misplaced really. Well, the queen and bishop are not ideal. The bishop is subject to a nasty pin with rook d5 here, but this rook is also threatening potentially rook d2 as well. So this isn't an ideal placement for white. Rook b2 is played, just addressing rook d2, but now we're just rook d5, and this is a really nasty pin. And you might think, well, hang on, rook b2 also supports this rook e2 idea. Okay, saving black for a moment. But now Magnus plays check, and after king h2 exploits the pin on the queen. Can you see the move Magnus plays in this position, which is the final move of the game, believe it or not? So if I give you 10 seconds starting from now, what does black play? Okay, f6, winning a piece in broad daylight. That rook was really liberated with that d5 thrust for black, which is one of the thematic ideas of the system. So this is showing a really kind of aggressive treatment of the Royal Lopez, which both Levon Aronian and Magnus Carlsen share, this idea that you can occupy the centre and aim to liberate all your pieces later with d5. It shows that the Royal Lopez with black can be super aggressive. What a crushing game here. But let's check in overview and summary, and also engine inspect this game, and check out also maybe some of the theoretical aspects of this system. So this is standard. This d3 move is gaining, I believe, in popularity as a way of avoiding the Royal Lopez Marshall Gambit variation, the Marshall Gambit variation. Now it's actually quite an enormous reference database of classical games here. So this might take a few seconds more. Okay. Okay, a reference check here reveals actually Rook E1 is the top move by far, 41,000 games plus. Bishop takes C6, the second most popular. Queen E2, the third, 1656 games. Bishop C6 was like 3,000 games. D3 is 944 games. Okay, so Rook E1 is the most classical move in this position, most beaten track. So D3, okay, and we see B5. So this is like theory. Now bishop, after bishop B3, D6. Here D6 is the top move. Castling is also 741 games for castling. D6 is 836 games. Bishop B7 very much rarer, 19 games. Okay, now A4 in this position. The top move is actually C3 here, 454 games. Movsey, Svidler, Carlsen all played C3 in this position. A4 has been played before, 254 games. Anand, Carlsen, Topalov, Svidler. H3 97 games. Knight C3 20 games. So in the game we see A4 and black responds with B4, which is the top reply. So this has also been played by Aronian, Kamsky, Grischuk before this move B4. Bishop G4 55 games, second most popular move. Bishop D7 52 games. Bishop B7 36 games. Rook AB8 26 games. So this is a very popular response, B4. Knight BT2 looks, it's one of the more standard moves. Also A5 is very popular. The top move played actually is A5, and Svidler has played A5 before here instead of Knight D2. Okay, now black castles, which looks fairly logical. So A5 now, and we have bishop E6, and now actually we're coming out of beaten track territory really quite heavily now after bishop E6, unless it's going to transpose back. So what's the result of the opening here? Magnus is offering actually double pawns. Are they of any significance? If white did take, let's have a look, take here, there's no easy way of exploiting the double pawn, so black is ending up with quite a dynamic game on the F file potentially. So that's, I don't think that's any big deal for white. If white can't exert more influence on them, black's dynamic play is strengthened. So we see after bishop E6 actually knight C4. So white's potentially trying to reroute to gain control and a grip on these light squares. Rook B8, and then we see move C3. Now technically the engine actually likes black's position already. Black takes, and now the move H6. What is white actually threatening here potentially? Bishop A4 is a potential threat. There's not actually too much going on here for a moment. Okay, now what is black threatening? Not much. It's not much at the moment. So Rook E1 does seem to discourage totally D5. It's totally ruled out in this position. We've got three pieces all on E5, preventing black's thematic D5 thrust. D5 really does seem to add value to a lot of black's pieces if it's able to be carried out. Now the move Queen C8 here, what is it actually threatening or doing? Well, maybe it's, in one way, it's simply helping prepare D5 later because it's just making way for the rook to use the D8 square. But it does also seem to potentially discourage H3, but I don't think that's actually on. If white plays H3, I think he can do this without worrying too much about this sacrifice here. I think white's got enough resources here. There's no attack to follow up with, so that's not, I think, the main thing. The main thing is rook d8 later. Okay, so we see in the game bishop c2, which looks a little bit passive, and it obviously it offers the double pawns here, but I think this is just going to give white a grip on d5. I know that the pawns look absolutely a wreck, but it's about equal here, because white has this kind of Maroczy bind grip on d5, and actually here even knight h4 might be possible as well, and that h6 is also a little bit of a problem if a knight's coming to f5. It's more difficult to evict the knight with g6 later, so this is okay for white, it seems. And even, you know, dynamic play, if that pawn is taken there, we have some dynamic play for white. Okay, like this, for example, and black could be in for a dangerous assault on his king side here. So white's, you know, trying to play dynamically with bishop c2, but it's all avoided by Magnus. He doesn't want to give white such a dynamic, aggressive position. He just plays rook d8. He's interested, I think, in really resolving the issue of the e7 bishop being kind of hemmed in by its own pawn chain. That's one piece which will immediately benefit from the d5 thrust in the centre. Also, of course, the rook using the d file, and also once this e pawn is chipped away, then black has to worry less about this use of d5 and f5. This is a gripper on these two key squares here, so it's like removing a very important part of white's grip on the centre as well. It's not just about piece liberation, it's getting rid of white's central grip. And even this pawn, if it can be knocked out later, gets rid of white's grip again, not just on these two squares but potentially on these two squares. So white's central grip is being undermined potentially with the d5 move, but for the moment it seems d5 is far off here because of this e5 pawn. So we see bishop f8, okay, knight e3, and this is an opportunity for white to immediately play d5, and you see the engine evaluation on d5 goes up. So here, for the moment, d5 has been kept in check, so to speak. Okay, so what can white do if he doesn't play knight e3? He wants to keep control of the position. Let's imagine he wants to keep d5 in check, so say h3. Keeping an offering of doubling white's pawns is not so attractive for black. And actually, you know, if d5 is totally ruled out here, surely, well, let's see. The Indians are actually taking on e5 with either knight, surprisingly, a little bit surprisingly. So even knight f takes e5 seems tactically possible, because the c6 knight, of course, is loose. It's attacking the c6 knight. So this is really ruled out at the moment, it seems. This would be better for white. So if white plays a non-committal move in terms of that d5 thrust, can Magnus kind of use up some time? Say g6, it's a weakening move, and maybe, okay, now bishop a4, putting pressure on black like this. Rook d1, because white also might want to play d4 in the future. This is a very different type of position, which should hold the balance. It doesn't look as though there's anything too immediate for either side. So in the game we saw this move knight e3, but it still looks kind of risky for weakening e5. So we see d5 played here. E takes, and now we really need to check why this is justified. So white unleashes, you know, in theory 3 pieces on e5 and only 2 defending, but that's enough. The rook, because the queen's here, knight takes, rook takes. Peter Zvidler in the press conference indicated this is based on a miscalculation to allow this position. I think he was assuming d4 would actually be a good idea. If we just check this with an engine in bit. So the idea he had seen is bishop e4. And okay, unfortunately black in this position can play rook takes a5 tactically, so the knight didn't have to move. Rook takes a5 and black's better, but actually there might even be a stronger move, d takes c3 from an engine point of view, and this is okay as well for black. But the principal move he missed is just rook takes a5. That's simple, and that's otherwise this would have been a problem for black. Say the rook had to go back, then I think white's doing fine here. Bishop a3, for example, was quite nasty here, and at least white will be getting an exchange like this. It looks quite nice. So this allowing d5 is just based on a miscalculation here, and black's starting to do quite well. Can the rook be displaced away from protecting e5 in this position? If we go with c4, for example, that's probably a disaster, or not. Rook d8. Let's have a look at this. Knight takes e5. Can rebound though with knight d4. Okay, a little bit, but it's not so bad, or is it? This looks like a very dominant knight. Bishop d6. And I think black has got a great game here. It looks visually like a great game. This is a very bad structure, a very nasty looking knight. Black's got an active game. Okay, and enough here, I think, for that pawn, for being a pawn down here. This is fine for black. So dislodging the rook like that is at a great positional cost of weakening the d4 square. So can it not be punished in any other way? Queen e4 is a very tactical and in some ways crude move, which I think has got the threat of d4 here. Yes, that is indeed the major threat. But isn't it just going into f5? f5 is a bit committal for black's pawn structure, creating some weaknesses. Queen e3. Technically white might be okay here with this f5 pawn, and white might look forward to d4 now, because that bishop is now looser. So this would be promising, I think, much more promising than the game continuation. So it just seems very interesting how e5 doesn't seem punishable here. What about bishop a4? If we try bishop a4, this is another way which Magnus must have had a look at. Now here it actually sets up rook takes a5. There's a loose rook on a1, so we can't take here without losing the exchange. There's nothing going on there. Again, it just doesn't seem as though this e5 pawn can be punished. Is actually rook c5 possible here? Can we take knight takes? This might at least be better than the game continuation, but black, has got the bishop pair here, pressure on the b file. It seems again a comfortable position for black, and also bishop d6 is looking at white's king as well. So this doesn't look the most amazing position for white in the world. So it seems black is doing nicely here. We see the move h3, bit of a timid move. So alternatives, queen a4 and bishop a4 seem reasonable alternatives. Now after this timid looking move, the kind of undermining of white's central control and grip continues with bishop f5, heading to knock out now this pawn, with potentially dissolving it with e4. And we see this passive looking move, rook d1, and if you look at the evaluation, black's already slightly better, not just equalised with black, but slightly better. So using the classic Roy Lopez instead of say a Sicilian or any other defence, black's just liberating his pieces. So queen e6 carries with it no immediate major threat perhaps, but doubling rooks looks tempting. Bishop b1, I don't think this helps white's cause to play for this cheapo, it seems, for bishop a2. Bishop a2 now threats, and queen d7 sidestepping that. Bishop e3, and now black dissolves white's central grip a little bit more with this move e4. And the engine's crying out for other moves, even like sacrificing the exchange here. This looks tempting, just to get it back. This is a tempting continuation as well. 2 pawns for the exchange, although this is a pin here, so bishop takes, rook, queen takes. 2 pawns here for the exchanges is also promising, but it's complications which Magnus is great at avoiding. He just wants to play the position elegantly and simply. So e4 follows this elegant campaign of reducing white's central grip even more and further liberating black's pieces, really. So we see knight d4, knight takes d4, also e takes d3 might be tempting here as well. Knight takes d4, bishop takes d4. This position is interesting from a theoretical point of view. Magnus indicated he had not deeply considered bishop takes h3 here. There's a kind of weakness of the last move that the g5 square is slightly looser than before, and actually the tactical shot here, bishop takes h3, which seems on the surface it's the sort of move you might play in a blitz game to just expose the opponent's king for a quick checkmate, something I might play in war zones, but it's the follow-up continuation which needs to be highly accurate to justify this. It's not so easy if white doesn't want to play ball. So if white wants to play ball, he'll get mated probably quite quickly here. Queen takes h3, and he's facing the firing squad here. So what can white do here? He's just getting absolutely massacred. In fact, even stronger than rook g5 might be queen g4 here, but this will do. It's absolutely crushing. But if white doesn't want to play ball here, this is where this need for absolute calculation comes in. But Magnus was interested in just playing simple chess to achieve a good advantage, and he admitted to not really investigating this much. He was also looking at rook takes b1, trying to get this working as well in some variations, but basically what he played got advantage, so there was no real need to investigate this in depth. What you would need to the follow-up from an engine point of view, which makes this so crushing, is this move. So white's not playing ball, it's not exposing his king, and then we have this crunching continuation here of rook g5, so d takes e4, rook g5, so this provokes g3. What else? If rook d3, then this also needs to be checked out, but check. Now in this position, rook g6 leaves black a lot better. But the critical line, the really critical line, is just playing g3 here, and there's in this position bishop g4 going for the f3 square. If f3, now the absolutely crushing computer move, which justifies the whole thing with bishop takes h3, is this move, rook b2, deflecting the white queen away. It's amazing stuff. So if queen takes, now bishop takes f3, and the threats are numerous. Queen h3, for example, and rook g3. Rook g3 and queen h3 are the two principal threats, and it's actually difficult, apparently, for white to try and defend this. Queen h2, bishop takes d1. That's pretty nasty, leaving black a lot better with queen g4 coming up. I have queen f2 again. Bishop takes d1 is also tempting, but even stronger, queen h3 here, and then just winning the queen like this, because black was threatening mate. But this is all kind of academic and theoretical, believe it or not, because Magnus, he does employ this calculation heuristic that basically, if he can see simple moves which achieve an advantage, or simple moves sometimes which stop counterplay, he's not going to calculate further. The idea in chess is not to play computer science type astronomically strong moves every turn like an engine does. The idea in chess is to try and win games, and as humans we're limited in our calculation capability anyway, so the move he played in this position was simple and strong. It didn't require finding resources like rook b2 in intricate variations which carry high risk, sacrificing a piece, when it's Peter Zvidler later that was lucky to have even this bishop e5 resource. He mentioned in the press conference he was lucky to have that resource. Otherwise he'd be in serious trouble in other variations here. So in this game continuation, okay, black was slightly better, but let's just go back to this position then. Okay, e takes d3, so black's doing very well here, knocking out white's dangerous light square bishop, which can be a problem in the Runa Pez. So we see the very tactical rook takes d3, so white's holding his position based on this loose rook on b8 here. That c5 isn't immediately just winning on the spot because of bishop e5. Nevertheless, after rook takes d3, white's central grip here has vanished after c4. Furthermore, this bishop is now able to potentially come to c5. So it looks a very pleasant control of the d5, of the d file. The central control is good. Immediate tactical threats like rook d2 and bishop c5 are emerging. So it's having an implication really for king's safety already, this position. Black's liberation in the centre, which I think is incredibly instructive actually. So bishop e5 here, it's difficult to suggest a move for white. Is he going to let this pawn drop? If he doesn't protect the pawn, it just seems pretty possible for black to just take on c3 here. Thanks very much. There's nothing going on. You have to try and protect the pawn, surely. So bishop e5 or queen e1 is an engine suggestion, but bishop e5 and bishop c5, and now we do seem to have this threat of rook d2. That seems to be the major for me, but no, actually there's other threats here, like f6 apparently, or queen d5 if black was given another move, followed by f6. Okay, so in this position we see rook b1. Here it might be tempting for this, but I think check and queen e4. So if we play rook d2 here, this might actually be not too good. Or even queen takes c4, just offering f2, and this might be okay for white, or better than the game continuation. So maybe that's not such a big deal in light of queen takes c4. So the rook stays there gripping the centre for a moment. So queen d5 actually holds the c4 pawn, making I think now rook d2 is a more significant threat because there's no queen takes c4. I think that's one of the main points actually, just to hold c4 for rook d2 to be a much more effective threat now. And in fact even bishop takes f2 and queen e5 is really dangerous. If king takes rook d2, if queen takes queen e5. So there's two major threats that white has to deal with. So it's getting to be a difficult position. Almost half a pawn advantage. We're talking about check technically. And now we see this move queen h5, which doesn't really help white's position. Sometimes we've got to try and play lesser evil moves. In a difficult position, it's grim reality that if you're worse, you're worse. And one of the things you want to sometimes do is hold out as long as possible, and you have to try and play lesser evil moves. Now the lesser evil move here, might be rook e8. Okay, but rook d2 seems quite dangerous. So what happens here with rook d2, for example? well, with the bishop held by the rook, I think this is the point, that queen g4 just offering f2 is very interesting. So if it takes king h2, and funny enough, in this position, the queen is much more centralized in this version than the game, and it looks as though Magnus would be busted in this position if this was the game continuation, and Magnus had played this bishop takes f2 here in this variation. Black is faced with very serious difficulties here. If g6, we just mate black with rook h8. If f6, then that's horrible as well. Check, and it's a forced mate with check here. Check, check, mate. So this is very interesting as a lesser evil move. Very easy with engines to suggest these other moves. Rook e8. So that creates a potential threat of sacrificing the pawn for queen g4, eyeing that g7 soft spot. So a better move, if this had been played, would be queen d7, just kicking that and stopping white using the g4 square. And okay, here again, actually it doesn't help white's cause now, that rook d2, if this is strong here. Check. And this is still dangerous for white in this position. Let's go with a very tactical bishop d6. Wow. So we have this tactical idea of winning the queen like this with material, gaining material, lots of material. And black's better again. So whatever way one looks at this position, it seems black is more than equal. Black's actually doing really well here. So it's a very difficult position in which this move, which doesn't really help white's cause at all, was played. And I guess we're going to see a big engine evaluation drop. Yeah, massive drop down the cliff, basically, unfortunately, falling down there. It's almost +3 now for black after this very powerful move, queen e4. So that white's cheapo threaten is rook h8, but also queen f5 immediately is also a more even more elegant threat of g6 and rook h8. Just to show that on the board, say this was played check and rook h8. So there are two threats to deal with, and they're both dealt with this move queen e4, just extinguishing both threats kind of elegantly. Much more powerful it seems, or maybe even more powerful than queen e6. So queen e4 is looking at the e1 square, as well as defensively it's attacking and defending. So no queen f5, no rook h8. In fact, you know, what can white do here? Any bishop g3, there's rook takes g3. It's a pretty nasty position. And also, of course, creates the potential rook d5 threat. White's actually busted. Let's try king h2. Now here, bishop takes f2, threatening. Again, rook d5. It's pretty nasty stuff. It's all pretty nasty stuff. Also, rook d5 is strong here for bishop takes f2. So rook b2 there's not too many things to suggest for white to do in this position. The pieces are just misplaced and subject to harassment. If the bishop, you know, drops back, try and avoid this pin, then we have just rook takes g3 using that pin. If it goes back to h2, even more embarrassing, just the back row mate, or quick queen e1 mate. So what do we do with this bishop on e5 here? If we try and protect it in this position, okay, there's bishop takes f2, and this is pretty nasty. If takes here, this is a mate in 3. if this is used as a pawn sack, trying to play for a lesser evil strategy, again, it's not particularly good. There's another pin here, bishop g3 for queen takes e8. So whatever the way we skin the cat here, yeah, there's so many ways of skinning the cat. So rook b2 just goes down to rook d5. White had a difficult position, and he made it much worse. But it was already difficult. He could potentially just be ground down by Magnus's fine endgame technique if he had played lesser evil moves. But instead, we have this short, sharp punishment in this position. This forcing move check, and this simple exploitation of the pin, keeping control of these light squares. So there's no check or anything. There's nothing here. Nothing. If Queen F7, okay, the rook takes here, not the pawn. The rook takes. Peace up. Thanks very much. Wow. So a fantastic game there from Magnus. What a final position. Just White's absolutely smashed in the final position. So let's go on to the next game. So Kramnik against Ivanchuk. We see d4, and Ivanchuk plays for a Nimzo Indian, but now Queen's Indian territory. So Bishop b4 check. Bishop d6, provoking White to play c5, but this releases the tension in the centre. The bishop can just drop back, and then later c6, and it's quite solid for black. One would think. So Bishop g2, Knight d7, again provoking c5. Both sides castle, Queen c2, keeping the tension in the centre. Vladimir wants to play maybe for e4 at some point, so Knight c after c6 now. Now the bishop can drop back on this diagonal. We see Knight c3, offering a pawn which is taken. Okay, and it looks as though e4 is tempting, but actually rook fd1 is played. Queen c7. And one of the advantages here of not playing e4 is this diagonal can be used to try to soften black's king position. So Knight g5 is played now, trying to provoke black into a weakness like h6, but that's avoided. Ivanchuk just plays bishop e7. Okay, we see a4. A much more solid opening choice from Ivanchuk in this game. So not wanting to repeat Dutch Leningrad, instead this Queen's Indian territory. And in this position, with the knight on g5, it's not controlling e5. And black goes in for this central break, e5. Interesting play for Vladimir. Very, very interesting. He's playing very dynamically now with a5. So what does this do? Well, as well as stopping black using the b6 square, this rook might have possibilities of coming in for a kingside attack. Believe it or not. And what about this pawn sack in the centre? What is this about? E takes d4, bishop f4. Okay. And White's going to regain the pawn, it seems. Bishop d6, rook takes d4. And c4 is also loose. b5 was also discouraged by this a5 as well for the en passant possibilities. Bishop takes f4, rook takes f4. And it looks like a kind of dangerous attacking position in some respects for Vasily here. He now plays h6, the knight goes back. And now, despite the pawn on a5, he plays b5 anyway, holding on to his c-pawn. A takes, knight takes. But now this kind of weakness for the last move is tapped into with what seems to be a powerful looking exchange sack. Rook takes f6. But does it concretely get a mating attack? Maybe not. We'll see. G takes, knight d4. On c6 anyway, that looks pretty dangerous. That's protected. Queen d2, now immediately threatening queen h6. That's protected. Now, an interesting tactical idea. If rook a5, trying to get the rook in, maybe knight d5, maybe that's something for the second pass to check out, and it will be attacking the rook. Instead, we see this tactical idea: bishop takes c6 to try and lure the bishop away from defending f5. This is taken, check, king g6. The king is prepared to munch the knight here. Obviously, it couldn't go backwards. That would be just immediately getting mated on g7 without a fight. So the king has to step forward. Okay, and now we see rook a5, so holding that threat of queen h6, so that's parried. Queen d4 now gives the idea that queen g4 is really dangerous for mating on g7, and Vasily just plays rook ag8 here. So on any queen g4 he's got king h7 potentially holding that g7 square. Rook c5, it looks like a nasty pin. Queen d7, challenge the queen, and also potentially can black do a counter like queen sack, so we'd have 3 pieces for the queen. Well, that's held on to with queen f4, and now h5, depriving the use of the g4 square. Check, and now actually Vladimir doesn't see much apart from carrying on checking black here. And there's a question here, can black go to f8? Well, I guess not, because there's other tactical opportunities like queen b8. Let's engine check here. So here actually they agreed a draw. Let's engine check this position and then go back to it. So if king f8, actually it seems the engine doesn't really give black a huge advantage. Check. Queen b4, it looks quite dangerous. Threatening rook c6. Maybe this is not the sort of position that black wants, to have to play all these precise kind of moves. But potentially is there something at the end of this which is of interest? It seems a difficult position. It's about equal, I would say. Even though black's the exchange up. But it requires, technical precision to look at all these complications. Okay, if the king wants to venture to f8 here, this is looking quite dangerous for the check here. Getting into a self pin for queen b4, that looks like one of the big snags of this. If a5, okay, black's got a long road ahead still, because there's a lot of tension in the position, there's a lot of pieces still on. The knight's kind of dominant and aggressive on f5. It's difficult for black to get the rooks out here, so it's quite understandable for Vasily to have just gone for the draw here. He doesn't want to lose from this position. It would be quite horrible. So drawing with black is a great result. Let's have a look earlier. So c5 here, I think, is just harmless. It releases that central tension. Black's going to play c6 later, and maybe even bishop's going to root like this later after c6 for e5, and then we can play for e5. So I don't think this is such a big deal. That tempo gainer. It's a bit like in the London system. If you play the London system as white and black plays c4, it's releasing like the central tension, and white's later for e4, later playing e4 with greater effect. So c5 is not made use of here, although the engine's even tempted with c5 in this position. In this particular position here, it might be slightly more favourable for c5, but still it's avoided. Queen c2. In fact, let's do a reference check here. Okay, scanning. No games found. It's actually quite an unusual position. Wow. Okay. So, okay, what's going on here? Temporary pawn sack. Aggressive looking move, knight g5. Okay, now a5. White's getting back his pawn with seemingly quite a dangerous attacking position. The knight's repelled, and now this pawn is protected. What else can black do if black doesn't do b5? There are other alternatives, but okay. Takes, as rook takes f6. It is very tempting, it seems, to play rook takes f6 here. Okay, knight d4, because it's not just the king side, it's the queen side under fire. So it's about equal here, apparently, from the engine valuation of this dev. So bishop takes c6 is basically at least guaranteeing white perpetual check possibilities if the king is really exposed. Okay, so rook a5 here is actually given us a blunder. So why is that? The way to draw, if white wants to draw, is check here, perpetually, I guess, or just knight f5 is on h6. There's no way black can defend h6. He has to use this as the defensive method to let h6 drop. Any other move here is not particularly good. Okay, but why is rook a5 in the game here seen as a kind of blunder, but from an engine point of view? We see rook h8. Now the best for white is rook c5, setting up, apparently, you know, at this depth, setting up, it seems, rook c6 for knight e7. That's the major threat. Or is it? There's more. There's queen d4 as well as h4. Okay, but in this position we saw queen d4, and you know we're looking at minus 2 here. So did actually Vasily slip up? Rook ag8. In the press conference, Vladimir Kramnik was very pleased with queen d4 and the possibilities it offered. It's easy for black to slip up, actually, if we consider the power of rook ag8 in contrast to, say, h5. This can potentially be a disaster, h5, because, for example, check, and this was demonstrated by Vladimir Kramnik. You've definitely seen this variation. King g7, rook g5 check. Look at that use of the pin. See, one slight weakness there, weakness to the last move. We've got g5 now, and this could be a total disaster after queen takes f6. It's a total disaster, in fact, for black here. There's no real defense. Let's see if the rook moves. Knight g6 check, and rook e5 check, and this is getting pretty nasty. So this rook ag8 sidesteps a lot of the issues. So h5 a complete disaster by contrast. Vladimir was actually wanting to get an engine to check if he missed any opportunities here, but it seems okay. So let's go back now. Rook c5 is at least giving. There's no problem, it seems, for white's attack. It doesn't need to checkmate black. If this bishop ever moves, I guess there's rook. There's all sorts of nasty things. If the bishop moved out of the way, it seems actually quite viable to play bishop a8. Okay. It's just it's a tricky position, and we see knight h4 check coming up in the game after queen f4 h5, drawing now this method. Okay, an interesting draw there. Okay, just on this position, it should be noted that white is actually a rook down. If you remember early in the game, he gave up the exchange, a rook for a knight, and then later he gave up a bishop for this knight f5 check. So he's actually a rook down. If you count the rooks, white is actually a rook down here. But Ivanchuk had only about a minute left on his clock, and Vladimir was asked in the press conference, you know, should he play on or not? But he thought that Ivanchuk had enough time. This minute was enough to find any resources. And I guess if we try and avoid the perpetual and go for a win, let's look at e4 and I think there's an amazing resource which was pointed out by Vasily, which the engine is not mentioned here. I think it was just bishop takes e4 in some line. Maybe it can't be here, surely. Knight takes e4, knight d5. I think this is actually faulty. White has something here. White has, when this was presented to both players in the press conferences, it looks as though White didn't have anything clear, but it seems the engine's picking up rook d5. Oh, knight e7 check, simple as that. Or was this the exact position? Maybe it was actually the king somewhere else. In the final phase of the game, we saw h5 check. Okay, this position here, check. So I think it must be here. Okay, but not bishop e4 here. Okay, let's go with rook e8. Okay, now let's go with f3. Okay, if knight a4, and I think, okay, this looks to be, you know, White's attack is fizzling out. If he hasn't got anything concrete, h6 is covered. White is just a rook down. So is this really enough time to risk? Well, with Vasily Ivanchuk having a minute on his clock, he could easily find knight a4. One would expect. One might expect. And if there's nothing here, then White is just material down for not much. Knight d4, we need to cover f5. So queen c8, doesn't seem to be too much going on. It looks fairly dangerous, but if Black's prepared to play rook e6, sacrifice an exchange here, okay. This looks, again, White is material down. So in this final position, I think half the audience thought that Vladimir might go for it to exploit the time pressure, but Kramnik only said if Ivanchuk had only 5 seconds left, then he might. But there was some strange variation with the bishop e4. The king couldn't have been there, basically. But e4, just simply rook e8 here, seems good. Okay, maybe rook c8 we can check out as well. And what is White doing here on the inferior? Rook c8, check, or what else? e5. Okay, this could be a little bit tricky. If Black doesn't play the correct sort of defense, it could get busted, you know. Takes. Right, there's another dangerous situation, but it's not okay, this wasn't forced at all, and Black's getting in trouble here, but that's not at all forced, this kind of thing. Rook g8, rook e5. So king g8 is the disaster. Rook g8, and this is holding the g6 square. So the attack is like you know, it's White can easily lose this basically, even though Ivanchuk's down to a minute. So it's understandable that the perpetual check was taken, and from Ivanchuk's point of view, he doesn't want to play king f8 either. Okay, so both sides don't want to take too much risk here. White is, though, a rook down from previous events in the game, just to clarify that. Okay, a technical note actually, you know, if rook takes c6, not queen takes because of knight e7 check, winning the queen, but actually the weakness of the last move, queen takes f5 here, is another important thing to note. Okay, just for those that are wondering. So here it doesn't seem as though yeah, there's not much going on apart from this idea of e4, which could present some difficulties, but the most accurate seems rook e8. I think here actually Black might be threatening bishop. No, bishop e4. I have to get that out of my mind. That there's a threat. I don't think that's a major concern to play bishop e4. I think the major thing is knight a4. Knight a4, or even just rook e5. I think this was mentioned in the press conference. Just rook e5 coming up. So let's say knight d5. Maybe just take, or here, and White can get in serious trouble. I mean, he's a rook down. Everything's hanging. Queen takes f5. Okay, so fair enough that both sides went for the draw. Happy with the draw. Okay. Okay, let's have a look at Radjabov versus Aronian. Timur Radjabov against Levon Aronian. So e4 from Radjabov, and we get a warrior pairs knight f6 instead of a6. The Russian system very solid. d3. Okay, avoiding very theoretical lines where queens come off and white has nothing virtually, and I think it's very rare for Aronian to ever lose in that variation. So bishop c5. Okay, this bishop looks quite aggressive on c5. Both sides castle, rook e8. It's Archangelist type system. So a6 now. Bishop comes back to b3 here, not to c2 but to b3. Eyeing that f7 square for a moment. d6. Now rook e1. Bishop e6. And you'll see some similarity actually with the Magnus Carlsen game, that black might be interested in d5 soon. And in fact, after knight f1, black is able to forcibly play bishop takes b3, a takes b3, and now with e5 quite secure here, these two against these two, white is faced now with black playing d5 here, liberating black's position a little bit. Okay, white can try and hold that e4 square, which he does, that e4 pawn. h6, but black's position, you know, seems without too many issues. It's as if he's got a comfortable position. Although h6 does invite this kind of menacing knight on f5, which can be difficult to kick because of that new weakness. So the knight seems to head for that natural, like, attacking square. Black's now generating some queenside play with a5. And the intriguing thing about this operation here isn't just about the structure of white's pawn structure on the queen side. This provides resources potentially for this rook to be quite resourceful, maybe coming in the game via the a file across the board potentially. You can imagine this could be quite dangerous for white's king over here at some point later. So bear that in mind. It's not just about trying to create exploitable weaknesses, because dissolving the double pawns would seem a silly idea anyway. Why would you want to dissolve white's double pawns? So often that's about creating more exploitable practical weaknesses, but also it's about liberating that rook to be a bit more mobile and versatile for maybe switching across that third rank later. Something to watch out for. So h3 was played, queen d7, bishop e3. The bishop drops back to f8 here, rook ad1, rook ad8. Okay, so there's a certain amount of tension in the position. Knight f5, and the bishop here is supporting the king side. It's indirectly supporting h6, so any sacrifices on h6, maybe supported by queen c1, would seem quite dangerous. But with the bishop here rather than over here or somewhere, which is difficult with that bishop there though, but it's a defensive bishop for the moment. Queen e6, and now this looks like quite a dangerous idea from Radjabov. He plays g4. The problem with it fundamentally, if this attack doesn't work on the g file, if he gets a g file attack, he'll be left with some weakened pawns, and his own king safety might become an issue later. That's something to bear in mind when splitting the pawns up with later g5. So d takes e4, and we see knight e7 challenging that knight on f5 and encouraging an exchange of rooks, which happens. Rook a1 going for that queenside pawn, rook a8 defending. c4, so trying to maybe fix black's pawns here, and Aronian plays ball with that. b4. It seems for the moment, is this potentially dangerous, or is it just full of weaknesses here on white's king side? Can white just switch this rook down to the back to the g file soon? He plays he plays g5 here in this position. Okay, the knight is supported indirectly by the queen, so that's didn't need the g4 pawn for supporting the knight on f5. So opening up this g file would seem dangerous, and it's with tempo on the queen. Now knight takes e7 is played here. The knight is quite loose potentially, or the pawn might be loose after e4, something like taking an e4 and then queen f5 might be on the cards. White takes on e7, and now king h2. It's a rather crude plan to get back to the g file, and is this going to be dangerous? But now here we see this magnificently resourceful move, which you kind of get this move often in variations of the Budapest Gambit, where the third rank can be used for a rook transfer. Here we see rook a6. It's possible with this a5 operation that this wasn't just to play on the queenside structure. So rook a6, all of a sudden it looks as though this rook's pretty dangerous. Actually, I once had an exciting game with a WGM Susan Laddick in a British Championship, where she played this very aggressive rook manoeuvre. It can be very, very difficult to face. Look at this pawn on h3. It's a vulnerability. I managed to resourcefully draw that, but I was very, very lucky to draw that. So rook g1, knight d7. Okay, queen e2, and now rook g6. So black's rook is very aggressive as well, and this is a loose piece, and we've got some weak pawns. It doesn't look too healthy, but on the other hand, queen h5 looks aggressive. Okay, h7 is defended, queen goes back. Now rook h6, and now there's a question about white's king safety. Knight e6 now is played, discovering an attack on the rook. The rook moves to h7, and maybe it was kind of expected, potentially optimistically, for a draw by repetition, but Levon avoids draw by repetition. He plays rook h4 here. The pressure's on white, and some commentators indicated that sometimes Radjabov seems a little bit as though he's not doing too much active, and against higher rated players like Levon Aronian, that sort of style might be squashed like a bug. So is this the case here? Is white actually doing too much here? It seems to be. To be fair, black's played super aggressively to leave white in a seemingly passive position. It was supposed to be white's g-file attack, and Levon's all over the squares now, and the king. It's white trying to struggle for equality now. So rook g1, g6. Black has the more compact structure. Bishop c1, queen e8. Okay, what is actually going on though now? What is this about? Bishop e3, now a4, playing actively on the queen side. Takes. Okay, there's infiltration points. Bishop c1, trying to put down the hatches on the queen side. But there's, if the queen ventures, you've got to be looking at all these tactics against black's king as well all the time. We see b3, just keeping the queen there, keeping an eye on e8, just attacking c4, attacking the rook. Queen g3, the rook moves. Now queen d3, protecting c4. Queen c6, and it looks as though this pressure is quite annoying, and this knight's kind of loose, ready for a discovered attack from the bishop. Bishop e3, rook h4, e4 is under fire, and we see a curious move now. King g3 attacking the rook, asking it to move back away from attacking e4. King goes back. King g7, c5. White potentially has some dangers to offer black along this diagonal as well. It's not all like a one-way street at the moment, but c5 suffers a bit from exposure of the e pawn like this. Queen a4, a slight weakness of the last move. So queen a4. Okay, queen c3 though, and now rook e8. So this pawn, it would seem far too dangerous to take it here, and we should really check this in the second pass. Perhaps what is actually the killer tactic in the game. White played queen d3. I'll just make a quick note of that position actually. Queen takes e5. Just a quick note for that to investigate. So queen d3, we see rook d8, queen c3, now queen b5, king g2, rook d3, okay, queen c1, Knight h5. Black is seemingly getting more aggressive, and these pieces are starting to look fragile, like the g5 knight. It goes back. Now queen b4. In the press conference after the game, Levon criticised this move. I think he felt here, okay, white should have been okay in this position with just the move queen e2. If black ever takes this pawn, there's a discovered check, bishop h6, winning the queen, so that pawn's not really attacked. But here, instead of queen e2, and this does offer some salvation for white, if the rook has to move, then rook c1 and queen c4, and that should be okay. But in the game we see this howler, it seems. Knight takes e5, allowing queen takes e4 with check, and that's pretty much a disaster for white. An absolute disaster. So queen e2 here instead, but we'll check in detail on the second pass. Queen e2, how bad is it actually for white? Knight takes e5 howler, so Levon credited a bit of luck that he got this opportunity. So knight f4 check here is really crushing. If bishop takes, then there's queen takes f3, and everything's like falling off. If king h2, queen h3 is mate. If king f1, rook d1, let's put that on the board. Or king h2, queen h3 is mate. And if the king moves, then okay, let's check the final position actually with an engine. We've come to the end of the game here. So knight f4 check. White had to resign. If king h2 here, just taking the knight, simple enough. Okay, it's a disaster here. Let's go back then. It seems that the black side of this Roy Lopez style of play is doing well at the moment. It seems there's some sort of similarities with the Magnus Carlsen game for this d5 liberation. So black's virtually, it seems, virtually equal here, and doesn't mind white trying for an attack, which looks it looks really dangerous, but it seems black has adequate defensive resources and also offensive resources with this rook switch coming up. So this made black's position kind of active aggressive as well. This rook switch exposing some of white's weaknesses on the king side, and we have draw repetition avoided. Okay, and now black's starting to be better here. Around here, bishop c1, black's technically actually better now, more than just equalised, so it's white struggling for equality now. So what is actually queen e8 about? I guess if black immediately played a4, maybe there's rook d1, and so it's just getting out of the way of rook d1 in advance. And then taking could be annoying, a little bit more annoying than the game continuation, but it's still okay for black. It's no big deal. So queen e8 first, just keeping the a4 option here. Now playing a4 in this position. It seems black's doing very nicely. He's got pressure points on white. c4 and e4, a slightly nice loose knight on g5. So we see after bishop c1, b3, queen g3, rook h5, queen d3, queen c6. Black's just standing better here, but an element of luck coming in. King g3, a curious move. It's actually mentioned by the engine, was mentioned briefly by engine. Probably better than f3, less committal than f3. Although, is it f3 really so bad? It can't be as bad as the game continuation. It supports that centre pawn seemingly naturally. Should white really lose this? Has he committed enough sins on the king side, if we're being honest? You know, maybe not. Maybe he's got an isolated pawn, but isn't like the rook misplaced? We can argue the rook is slightly misplaced there. White's rook and queen are in the centre. Should white really lose this? Maybe, you know, objectively not. The engine's crying out it's equal as well. But intuitively, look at the rook placement compared to this rook. The knight is holding h3 technically. White has technically got the d file. I think chances should be about equal. So maybe it's just time pressure stuff coming in. So king g3, maybe, you know, just f3 might have done. Okay. Okay, so king g7. Now c5 creates more lines of responsibility. This fifth row is more effective now for white's. Sorry, for black to play queen a4. It's more effective. It could have just held there, and in this position again, maybe just played f3. Is that possible, or is this really bad here? Knight h5. Actually, we've got some severe problems with knight f4 now. The knight's kind of cut off from coming to f3. That's actually significantly different to before. That looks like a very loose knight because of knight f4 coming up. In fact, black's on the verge of winning this, so that's hugely different to what we saw earlier in some respect. With knight f4 as key threat, surely, or just f6, just f6 winning the knight. It's unpleasant for white, this position. Just as a sanity check, in the earlier one where we examined f3 here, why wasn't this knight such a problem? If we just go with say rook h5, I'm taking on b3 as threatened. Okay, it really, maybe sometimes just really depends on the exact positions, if this knight's loose or not, or trappable. Okay, so let's go back. So the game c5 makes this move queen a4 more effective on e4, and white really, okay, maybe he's banking on queen c3. Okay, so it's now impossible. Knight e4 with queen e5 is check, surely. That's just winning for white. Just picking up a piece, you know, knight f6, queen takes e7, bishop f6, we just play queen takes e4. So okay, so black just played rook e8. Now queen takes e5, and a note was made about this position to investigate. Oh dear, oh dear. Okay, if you're not looking down there, this makes for a puzzle position, black to play and win. 10 seconds, please don't look down there. Black to play and win in this position. Nice puzzle position. Bishop d6, ouch. Double attack on the queen, queen's pinned to the king, ouch. So yeah, the pawn can't be taken there, which means e4 is just looser than it was before because of this c5. Okay, so rook, sorry, queen d3 was played. Maybe a lesser evil might be rook e1, because if it takes queen e5 is check. So this might be more tenable than the game continuation, much more tenable than the game continuation again. So it required white to really blunder coming up soon. Queen b5. But you know, to be fair, Levon kept up the pressure with these moves. Now, king g2 apparently is blunder in this position. Knight f3 apparently holds the balance. So why isn't, say, you know, rook d3 a big deal? We can just take on e5 here, crushing actually black. Yeah, it's a crushing advantage it seems. But in this position, after king g2, rook d3 is somehow a big advantage to black. If queen takes e5 here, another puzzle position. Amazing. Amazing resource. Bishop d6 using this pin here. This is ridiculous. Even if the king's not there, there's another tactic with bishop d6. And if white's forced to play something ridiculous like this, then okay, black can just sack here to get rid of the attack, and black will end up being better here. So these little finesses in the position make all the difference to the variation. So black's now better. He's in the driving seat. This queen e5 is still not possible here. Okay, so queen c1, we see knight h5, and the knight's slightly loose. Knight f3, we see queen b4, and again this e pawn is slightly loose now. But here queen e1, queen a4. So the move recommended by 11 was just queen e2, and he thought he didn't have much, and the engine agrees. Queen e2, it's driving the rook back. We see the Howler knight takes e5 instead, which goes instead to a crushing advantage for black. In fact, let's just check this one with king f1, because here it would seem queen takes e5, we're winning the queen, but there's actually king f6. This is crazy, isn't it? Bishop g5, king e6 holding the queen. So that's not winning the queen. It's the king comes to defend the queen here with king f6. Oh, this is amazing. So let's look at queen e2 here as an improvement then. So there's this hold up in this position. It seems there's plenty of play left. Rook c1, as Levon said, for queen c4. What is black doing? Does black really want to commit to knight f4? If he doesn't commit, what is white actually threatening? Actually, there's a threat of rook c4 and knight takes e5. Can't take here because of bishop h6. What does black want to do? Does he want to play a move like f6? Does queen c4 and white's back in the game? No big deal after all that. So just one major mistake really. Knight takes e5, and it's all over basically after knight takes e5. So queen e2 here. That's a real shame. A real shame. And this could be the difference, because it's critical that Aronian and Coulson are in the running, and this keeps Levon's pressure up on Magnus Coulson, the favourite of the tournament. That this horrendous blunder, knight takes e5, was played. Let's check. Okay, and this doesn't work. It's actually losing a piece as well. King f1 is not a lesser evil because of queen takes e5 is actually on here. Oh dear. The brutality of chess. So knight f4 and white resigns. Okay, let's go on to the next game of the round. Grischuk against Gelfand. So Grischuk played e4, and we see an invitation for Sicilian Sveshnikov, the anti-Sveshnikov or Rosalimo system. After Rosalimo, we've seen a classic game of recently, bishop b5. And we've seen this variation recently with rook e1 after a6. Bishop c6 is a move, as well as we've seen for a quick d4. But white played bishop f1, and now after d5, d3, we have a much quieter scenario. Black gains space in the centre, but giving up the c4 square potentially. e5, knight d5. c4 from white, from Grischuk. That is on the Grischuk. That's taken. And it looks as though it's a kind of c3 Sicilian-ish position now. Bishop b2, b5. Okay, let's carry on here. Knight e4, castles, rook b1. Knight b6, bishop a1, bishop b7. So both sides getting to a position which is with not too many exchanges yet in the game. A very complex, rich position here. Queen d2, a5, Queen f4. Now it looks as though knight f6 might be on the cards with some sort of kingside attack. Knight d7 holds that f6 square more securely. Queen g3. So white has this classic kind of overprotection of e5, which is often a basis for a nice attack. Bishop a8. You see h4 now. a4. Black's got queenside counterplay. h5, h6. Stopping white from playing h6, which could be annoying. Queen g4. Queen c7. Keeping an eye on e5. And now we see knight d6. So this diagonal looks quite dangerous for the black king. If it takes, we've got danger on g7. But Boris plays actually a tactical move to undermine the knight. Knight c takes e5. And it's quite clever here because knight takes e5. Not taking on d6. Which could run into severe trouble, I expect, but actually knight f6 hitting the queen first and tying down. If the queen goes to g3, there'll be a nasty pin on the knight, so the queen actually goes away from this nice g7 square. So bishop takes d6, and he's getting his pawn back at least by dropping back to a d1, but his attack is not so evident here. And in fact, black's going a pawn up again. Knight takes h5. So chaotic game here. What is actually going on? Is this an attacking failure? What's happened? Because black seems to be laughing now in this position. He's a pawn up. Where is the attack? No problem with g7. In fact, rather cruelly, the knight's actually protecting g7 here as well. e5 is undermined. This bishop looks pretty good. It looks as though black stands very nicely. Queen d1, the knight goes back. Knight g4. Is this convincing with this structure as well? It looks like a passive structure. If only black can maybe exchange off dark square bishops one day and kind of bear down on d3. Okay, but he takes on g4 and now e5. That does lock down the d3 pawn. So white seems quite a bit worse. f4, rook b8, rook e3, but he's creating some pressure now. f6, rook b e1, a lot of pressure on e5, queen f7, protecting e8, so I think now e takes f could be a threat, so maybe that explains f5. Okay. Although black is a pawn up, it's going to be a very difficult pawn to convert. White has extra space and opportunities around this f5 pawn, this wedge here, this wedge pawn. It's tricky. How can white convert this? Bishop c6, rook h3, threatening rook h6. That's defended. With king h7. Bishop b2, the bishop's coming round. I know it looks kind of crude this game, but it's dangerous. Bishop comes round. And in this position, I would assume white's threatening some sort of cheapo, because this pawn isn't taken on a2, so we'll check this in the second pass. Black actually played rook g8. Now this pawn is defended. Rook e2. Bishop f8, adding weight to the defense of h6. Rook f2. Rook e8. Bishop e2. This bishop can crawl back into the game, like this, for example. e4 stopping bishop f3. Queen h4. ed. And now not bishop d3, but bishop h5. Exciting position. Check. rook f1, that's taken. Now queen e7. Queen e7 rather. Rook takes d3. Queen e5. Is bishop g6 check at all dangerous? With the bishop on f8, it really is holding the solidity of h6. Queen g4, bishop e8. Bishop g6, that's taken. Fg, king h8. Rook d7, and there's a cheapo alert. Bishop takes h6 for rook h7. Mating here, potentially. Bishop d6. Inviting bishop takes h6. In this position now, black has perpetual check. Check, 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 and agreed to draw. There's no way of white to get out of the checks. That was quite an exciting game, demonstrating overprotection, which is one of my favourite strategies in Blitz. That white was actually trying to overprotect the e5 square. If you look at the style of how this is played, with e5, there's a strategy of overprotecting this e5 point, demonstrated here. When c4 was played, now there's an opportunity for this bishop to fianchetto and add weight to overprotecting e5. So we get this overprotection strategy. Some structural cost to white, but some benefit. The knight's nicely placed on e4, but the structural cost, this backward d pawn potentially could be vulnerable. But he's going for c4. He's overprotecting e5. So here, white can use this spearhead pawn to create some concrete threats. I'm sure white's now threatening. Surely knight f6. Nope. Yes. Yes. Knight f6 is a concrete threat now. Just to demonstrate that, let's have a quick look at a4. So say, well, does knight f6 not work because of a4? That's interesting. Knight f6 here. No, that should be okay. If takes, well, threatening queen g5 and mating. And if king h8, queen e4, queen h4, and it looks absolutely end of game. So Boris's move is very nice here. After queen f4, knight d7. I think this pretty much extinguishes knight f6 as a threat. So queen g3, and white continues trying to attack or build up attacking pressure. So h4, black plays on the queen side. h5. Now, is h6 a threat? Yes, just weakening the dark squares. Apparently the engine does consider h6 a threat, even though it closes up the lines and anti-intuitively, but that will still be advantageous after that weakening. For example, let's just as an example, so h6, queen f4, white's got that grip on the dark squares, and you might think, well, the lines are closed here, so why is this such a big deal? Perhaps it's not easy to demonstrate why this could be a big deal, because especially as if it looks as though black's better anyway, with the queen side play evolving here. Okay, but it was parried anyway. Black parried h6 if it was a perceived threat with h6 himself, keeping everything tight, and he's still got his queenside counterplay operations available. So has white's attack run out of steam? Queen g4, what does that actually introduce? It's difficult to fathom actually. Bishop e2, bishop d1. Okay, or maybe just the idea of g3 later, or knight g3. Okay, let's see. Knight d6 is played here, and now this was technically a very powerful move, because it seems as though this is a fragile knight. Knight d6, although in one way it's clever on g7, it is a tactical liability in its own right. It's only protected by the pawn. So instead of knight d6, what is white doing anyway in this position? Knight f6 check here. We don't take that, we just play king h8. And queen e4, we can just munch that knight. Surely g takes. That's no big deal there. So this is nothing. Knight f6, which might lead, okay, to an interesting knight d6. But the powerful move knight c takes e5 to Boris's credit. So knight takes e5 and the sneaky knight f6, just getting the queen away from g7. If black had played bishop takes d6, it's probably an absolute disaster, I guess. Knight takes d7, threatening mate. e5, okay. Well, it's a disaster. It's an absolute end of game here. Okay, so the idea is knight f6. Nice defensive resources being demonstrated. Okay, now here, if queen g3, then that's nothing. Bishop takes d6. The knight can't move without losing the queen. So the queen, we're going into materialistic mode, trying to minimize material loss with queen d1, biting at an important pawn of black's queenside counterplay, at least. So taking that away. But black is better. Black is better. This h5, the remnants of white's attack removed. Black is pawn up. Black's better. Boris has a beautiful position. Look at the bishops. Look at this pawn structure here. But white's managed to drum up some counterplay. So he starts off with knight g4. This is taken. Now he locks down d3, which seems very attractive. Boris locks down d3 with e5. Still very good for black. So we see this f4 move. Is there a bluff at some point here? How did white get back into this game? Rook b8 seems very sensible. In light of e takes, still, you know, queen g7 is to be avoided, mate. So just support that pawn instead. We see now rook e3. Okay. Now this looks like a sensible move as well, just blunting that bishop now and really starting to threaten e takes. Queen g6 also prevents e takes as well as this move. Don't want to lose that rook, so we see queen f7. The engine is also suggesting another alternative to defend the rook is bishop c6. That does the job as well. So now e takes is on the card, surely. In this position, nope. Nope. Is it? I'm not actually sure it's playable. If we try and give white a move, e takes. Let's see what's going on here. Bishop takes f6. No, this. I think king h1 influences the picture here, but I'm just trying to determine, is e takes f4 an actual threat? Black stands better here on the move played f5. If bishop b2, that's more to demonstrate this. E takes. Well, black's better. It doesn't matter about bishop f6. Pardon me, black's just better. g5, for example. Where is white's attack? There's nothing. So white is worse whatever happens here. So okay, he plays f5. Okay, bishop c6. So we're nearly like +2, but there are some cheap threats. Rook takes h6. King h7, parrying that. Bishop b2, trying to set up more cheap threats with bishop c1. Okay, and now we see bishop c1. Could black call white's bluff here with rook takes a2? What was actually threatened? I assumed there was a cheapo threatened for rook g8, but apparently at this depth nothing is seen. But we'll leave it for a moment. Is there a cheapo here? doesn't seem like there's anything. It seems as though you know, white needs more resources here for the attack. So if this pawn could be taken, you know, that's a pass pawn. So maybe, I don't know, maybe time pressure or something, but the move rook g8 was played, not taking that pawn, and now white can defend that pawn. Bishop f8, and this looks like could be a serious error. Passive, maybe overly passive. Maybe the rook can just go back here and set up some new threats. So bishop f8, and that's better, having that rook on that d file against d3, rather than in the game continuation here we see some passive pieces now. This rook's passive on g8. White's not doing as badly as before. Okay, if black's putting his pieces like this, I think he just wants a draw. Unless he's banking on this break e4 and he doesn't mind that rook trapped in because he's banking on e4 here. So we see bishop e2, e4, queen h4, and things got a little bit scary now with this bishop e2 threatening bishop h5 as an option, which is taken up now. Instead of bishop takes d3, which is still not as clear as before that black stands better because he's hemmed in his pieces. They're very, very passive, and he didn't take that pawn. Did he really have the opportunity to take a2? Have I got this game correctly? I got it from chessgames.com. But if he had that opportunity to win that a2 pawn, then this would have been a dangerous passed b pawn. Maybe some time pressure blunders, or just accepting the bluff of white's attack. But here it's tricky compared to that earlier stuff. Rook d2 actually holds the e1 square against rook e1. Okay, so we have instead bishop h5. Now check. Okay, if king h2, that would be a disaster, I think, for white. Check. And this is looking like, you know, mating. Mate, that's horrible. So white's got to play surely rook f1, only move. This is taken, and now black's just, okay, black, very passive pieces. This rook in prison here. Rook takes d3, queen e5, queen g4. Okay, so queen g4. Is there actually a cheapo here? Bishop f7. Oh, that would be nasty for queen g6. And yeah, if just amusingly, I'll put this on the board. This kind of cheapo is not nice. So okay, so black played bishop e8, stopping bishop f7, and we see check. It's taken, check. And now it's equal because white's now got this bishop takes h6 resource, chipping away at black's king. So black has to go in for the perpetual check with bishop d6. This guarantees a draw of the bishop takes h6. If white tries anything else though, if he doesn't play bishop h6, if he tries queen h4, then that's now too slow. White's going to get executed. His king's going to get executed surely. Say bishop takes queen e2. He's in for the chop. So, you know, white king is weak here. So he's got to take his opportunity now. Bishop takes h6. So if takes, there's rook h7 mate. And black goes in for the draw with the checks. Now if black plays rook e8 here, this is far too dangerous surely. I think bishop g7 will lose. Bishop takes g7 will lose. Black's laughing here because white's king's getting it. But bishop d2 instead. Okay, holding e1. This is scary though with that pawn on g6 now and the open h file. Now why is g3 prompted? What's the actual threat behind g3? Just king g2 just to put the king on g2. And then maybe even on h3 later. Okay, so here this is nothing now for black anyway, it seems. So Boris, yeah, went wisely for the draw here, bailed out. But yeah, it seems there's a critical moment in this game, unless I've got this game a misprint, that black could have at some point taken on a2 here instead of this move rook g8. So at move 36, I'm interested to see, did I get this game score wrong? Couldn't black have played rook takes a2 here? It's easy with us with engines rated at 3200 nowadays, or more, to point out errors in games, but it looks as though this is like +3, this position. I wonder what was worrying White about it. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the coverage of this round. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.